but I'll count eventually. Yeah, thank you. Keep doing that.
Now it's hard. It's hard.
It's got to start all over.
Sorry. I said keep doing it. So, hello. Since we have last met, some of you might know this, we actually now have a lot more like proper online social media presence, which means now not only are we like a real meetup, we're like a real thing. We have a website and a Twitter handle. I don't know if this is Trevor. Did you talk about this earlier when you put this?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I was waiting.
Okay, so if you want to actually follow what's going on, right now we don't actually have that much there, but we do have NYCHTML5.com, which is not the same as New York City application developer, HTML5 application developers meetup, but it's a lot shorter to remember and it's a lot easier to actually type into your browser. So if you want to go here, you can get details about our next meetup, and hopefully eventually we'll be building in more to this gigantic monolith of a website that uses every piece of code technology imaginable. We have golf and front at the same time. We also apparently have to throw broccoli in there. I have a branch with Ember, and it now uses React. We'll see what happens. So we also have a Twitter handle, which we will keep relatively up to date about New York City events and things. I have intentions to be building, well, we all have intentions of actually making this thing open source so that it doesn't have like private keys and things, and then having other people help us build it. But ideally for me, we build something in here that has a calendar or front-endy things, mainly because it's very difficult for us to make sure that all of the dates do not clash, that you're not competing with like the Ember meetup, which is amazing and you should all go to. So that stuff like that will eventually be here. Eventually we'll be asking for help, maybe to be building some of these things. So if any of you have any free time, we'll talk about that stuff later. So we are on Twitter at NYCHTML5. I'm working right now on changing the name. We'll see how that works out. We are on the internet as NYCHTML5.com. You need to know what people are actually going to speak about at the next meetup. It's going to be the first thing up there. So any questions? I don't know if that actually warrants the any questions, but if you have any, let me know. I'm just going to go right into it. And I have some other details and news about exciting things at the end.
And after tonight, this data is going to be a little inconsistent because it's partly static and partly dynamic because I'm using meetup as the API right now. So the top is dynamic, but the names down here are.
So eventually this will look very weird, but we will strive to fix it by typing very quickly.
Story of my life.
Yeah. As soon as the meeting, so exactly at like 9 p.m. we'll have to type it. Okay. So yeah, I have some announcements and things that I will make at the end about cool things, and now we can just get started. So our first speaker tonight is Gustavo Medina. Come up right now. He's going to talk to you. He brought a bottle of water with him. So
Yeah. All right, guys. How are you, JP?
That's okay. He's going to talk about lots of very cool Shadow DOM things. Please welcome.
All right. How's everyone doing?
Good.
So, my name is Gustavo Medina. I'm a front-end developer currently working on makerstudios.com. Over there, I deal with an HTML5 video player. So basically, by dealing with this HTML5 video player, that's how I started diving a little bit into the Shadow DOM. I'm pretty sure everyone has experienced some of the problems when developing libraries, frameworks, or some kind of embeddable widgets. You have to worry about duplication of IDs, unintentional styling, right? Like you don't want your styles to override somebody else's styles, or the other way around. Also, there's not really a way right now to hide implementation details. Like, if you have like markup that is not semantic or like some styles that you don't want people messing around with, there's nothing preventing you or nothing preventing the client of your code to do that, right? So, to me, like these kind of problems, sound like we have a problem of lack of encapsulation in the web. So basically, we do need this. We need a boundary between our code and the the consumer of our code. Right now, even though I've said that it's not present on the web, it is. With iframes, you get all that stuff, right? But as we all know, iframes are really heavy and restrictive, and we don't really like to work with them. For that reason, browsers and the W3C have come up, with some solutions to try to solve for this problem. And they came up with the web components spec. Right now, it's most of it is like pretty solid, and some browsers are implementing it. I think Chrome, you can get some of this stuff if you go out to another flags, for web, the experimental features for web development, and you can play around with that. So the web components API spec. So what is it? It consists of 5 things really. Templates. I'm pretty sure everyone knows templates. There's a bunch of markup that is just that. Decorators. I think I checked like 2 weeks ago or whatever. The spec's still being refined, or there's actually no spec. But it supposedly has to deal with enhancing or styling, custom elements. Then, the shadow DOM, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Which that's bare minimum is just encapsulation of the, a subtree of the DOM. The 4th thing in the web components is the custom elements. You will be able to create your own custom elements. And imports, which is just the mechanism to package and deliver everything else in the list. Also the shadow DOM, right? As I said, the shadow DOM is just a subtree of DOM nodes. What's special about this, this subtree is that it can be associated with any element on the page. And when you associate it, some interesting things happen. All of a sudden, you get scope IDs and styles. No more ID collisions. Your styles are scoped to the shadow DOM. So there's no bleeding out of styles to the parent page or to the page, or the styles in the page will not affect the markup in the shadow DOM. Also, the markup is encapsulated. There's not really a way for you to I'm gonna lie a little bit for now. There's not really a way to traverse the DOM inside the shadow DOM from the page. Also interesting, the subtree is rendered instead of the actually elements child nodes. But this subtree actually is not a child of the element. So that's kind of a little bit confusing. So in this image, let me explain a little bit more. I took this from the W3C website. So on the left side, we have the shadow host. That's actually the name that given by the W3C. And on the right side, we got the pink subtree, and the top is the shadow root. The dotted arrow just means that they're being associated or bounded to each other, right? So basically, the shadow root is not visible from the page. So what happens at render time? This is really what happened. We got the shadow host is, as a parent of the shadow, of all the shadow root child nodes, but the shadow host doesn't render its own children. So basically, all these guys over here, they will not be rendered yet. So here's some code that I can make this happen, right? So here on the top, we got just a template, and this template will be actually our shadow DOM. We got just an element, and it's going to become our shadow host. And all you need to do is just grab that element, and then call a method on it. And the method is create shadow root. And that's all you need to do to create a shadow DOM. At that point, the shadow DOM is associated to the shadow host. And over here, I just take care of some stuff, just querying the getting the template contents and actually appending it to the shadow root. So this thing basically will render, instead of hello world, it will be rendered as hello shadow world. So that's kind of cool, but that's not too interesting, right? So we need more control over that. We need a way to control actually what goes into the shadow DOM. So this control is actually insertion points. Insertion points are denoted by the content tag. So the way that this works is basically the content. I don't know if you guys can see over here. Basically, this line is really important, and actually the content tag. When you associate the shadow DOM to the shadow host, it's gonna all the content inside the shadow host is gonna be rendered inside that in this place. It's only gonna be rendered. It's actually not the nodes are not gonna be they're not gonna be actually moved physically, or like if you query the shadow DOM, like these nodes nodes do not exist in there. They're just rendered or projected into. So again, this is a picture from the W3C. We got over here on the top left, we got our shadow host and associated with the shadow root. And this shadow root has an insertion point. So at render time, the child nodes, they're just gonna be rendered at the insertion point. So we got these two child nodes rendered there. So we could have a little bit more control of that, because before we were just grabbing all the stuff that was inside of the shadow host and we were just throwing it into the insertion point. So you can have multiple insertion points, and you can control what goes into the shadow DOM. The insertion points have a select attribute, and the select attribute just takes a simple CSS selector. And it's going to try to match it against the shadow host content or nodes. And whatever matches, is going to be projected into the shadow DOM. Two important things to know here. The select is actually it's a CSS selector, but it only will work for immediate children of the shadow host. So if you have some kind of nesting in here, you will only try to match it against immediate children of the shadow host. And second of all, so whenever something is matched, it's going to be projected into the shadow DOM, and if at some point there's a second match, that is not, basically that second match is not gonna, basically the second match is not really, or whatever element is matched, it's not gonna be matched a second time. So for instance, in this example, we have the template right here, and we gotta select, with that, we're gonna select a node with the world class. So basically here, this is gonna be projected into this space. The same with location, and over here we have a element selector, so it's gonna try to grab all the spans, right? But we have these two spans have been matched already, so they will not be matched again, and then we get two more spans that will be thrown in here. And lastly, you can do a wildcard, which is gonna be give me whatever is remaining, whatever content is remaining in the shadow host. Also, like you can have many shadow DOMs nested within each other. It gets a little bit more complicated, and I haven't played too much around with it, so I'm not gonna talk about it. But the way I understand it, it's just like the last shadow node created is the one that is gonna be associated with an element, and the next one is gonna be inserted into this shadow insertion point. Okay, well, so this is kind of cool and everything, so let's go a little bit, let's take a look at how we style stuff in here. One of the gains of the shadow DOM is that styles are encapsulated. Again, nothing bleeds out of the shadow DOM. Interesting enough, the distributed content, or the nodes that are projected into the shadow DOM, keep the the pages style. So how how can we style these elements, or like shadow the shadow host or the shadow root and everything else in it? So there's a few new CSS selectors. So from within the shadow root, if you have some styles and you have the selector host, and you pass it could be like a class name or a tag name or whatever, or it could be empty too. You're able to style the shadow host. So this is kind of cool because you can start thinking about theming, right? Like if you have a shadow host with some class, then you can start targeting that shadow host with that class and theme your your whole stuff according to that. There's also the carrot and double carrot, but they name it cat and cat.
Those are actually getting renamed.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's last. I hope so, because
Yeah, there is a big drama about this.
Do you know what they're going to be renamed to?
Well, they're going to get renamed to just like Shadow and Shadow Deep or something like that.
All right.
And
Well,
also all this.
well, so let's keep
Always
this.
ruin the fun.
Yeah. So for now, let's keep it like hat and cat. They work just at the same as selectors, and these are selectors that will be found in the page, not inside the shadow root. They just work as the sender selectors, but the only difference is that the hat just crosses one shadow DOM boundary. The double or carrot or cat actually crosses any boundaries. Actually, I forgot to mention, this is kind of cool. Well, you need to know that with the host selector, the specificity of it is like it's a little bit more or less specific than actually styles found in the page. Anyways, so let's keep moving on. We have pseudo elements.
Those have gotten removed from the spec.
Which ones?
Pseudo elements.
Really? Even the part ones?
Yep.
Oh, no way.
I know.
I was excited about it.
Yeah,
Damn it.
you have to use the hat and the cat. Or
Oh,
the
really?
shadow and the shadow.
Oh, that's not fun.
Yeah.
Anyways.
There's multiple layers of changes.
I know.
Shit.
I know.
Alright, I should have kept up with my... Well, so I guess, anyways, I was excited because with the content, right, with the content you were able to target the distributed elements inside the shadow DOM. And, with the part attribute, so if you had in your template or your shadow DOM, you have some, element with an attribute part equals something from the parent or whatever, from the page, you could target that one by just doing this, right? So basically, you were kind of giving an API, like a hook for the client of your code to be able to style, these parts of this markup inside your shadow root. I don't know if these properties have been removed or not. So yeah, you were able to, well, at least as I read 2 weeks ago, we had the properties that to control some of how encapsulated your styles are. Reset style inheritance. It's pretty much self-explanatory, and apply author styles. Again, that really seems pretty self-explanatory as well. So also JavaScript, right? So JavaScript is not encapsulated. So you gotta keep everything again in closures or whatever. So if you have some kind of script tag and some script in your shadow DOM, and if you have some global variables, guess what? They're gonna be also global in the page. Two things that I noticed too while playing around with this, like you cannot traverse the anything inside the content or the insertion point, because all the stuff that is there, actually there's nothing, right? Everything gets projected into it, but it's not really a child of the content tag. And also, some events do not cross the shadow DOM boundaries. More interesting stuff. Shadow root, right? When you associate your element in the page with a shadow DOM, so when you call the create shadow root, the element gets a shadow root property, which is going to point to the shadow root. Also, you have nested shadow DOMs. You can access basically the parent shadow DOM by accessing the older shadow root property. Also, you can traverse some of the distributed content, or all of it, from inside the shadow DOM. If you select the content tag, and then you call the getDistributedNodes method, and it's going to return everything that is projected inside your shadow DOM. Kind of the inverse too, like you can get a handle of the distribution point from outside the shadow DOM by just calling get destination insertion points. Let's see, and lastly, this is the last thing, event retargeting. Everything is retargeted to look like the event source is the host element, with the exception that events originated from distributed content, they keep the original sources. And this is a list of the events that do not cross the shadow DOM boundaries. And I think that's it. Yep, that's it. So, I don't know, questions?
Any questions? Yeah, we have a minute or two.
Browser support?
Browser support. So right now, basically, it's only I think only Chrome, and you have to turn it off. But there's an interesting project called the Polymer project, which actually, is a bunch of polyfills to support all this stuff. Not only Shadow DOM, but also some web component stuff. So Polymer project, you should check it out.
And also, Mozilla is implementing it behind a flag, and Apple has just started implementing it, but they have lots of complaints, which leads to lots of drama, which is what's going on right now.
That's why we have no cats and hats, people.
Yeah.
So Apple killed the cat in the hat?
Basically.
It's up to us to keep it going.
Hey,
Don't they own Disney? Doesn't Disney own it?
what are the performance implications of the Shadow DOM?
I haven't I haven't done much performance testing, but the Shadow DOM is how a bunch of stuff gets implemented in Chrome at least, like the video tag or the range input. So I imagine that it probably is not much a difference of whatever we have right now. So yeah, not too sure about it.
And then, just similar, what are the security implications of having Shadow DOM elements passed around?
What kind of security concerns do you have?
I don't know, just like what kind of new problems does it introduce that we haven't been aware of so far? I'm sure there's a lot.
That's a good question. But I mean, as far as keeping your code safe from anybody else and messing around with it, the Shadow, this stuff is not supposed to be that, right? You still get access to all the styles or the scripts and everything that's in there, right?
What about oppositely? You go to websites and you look in the DOM and you can't tell what's going on, but in some way data is being collected off your site or the Shadow DOM's doing stuff.
That's a really good question. I haven't looked too much into that.
But in the inspector, you can open up Shadow DOM nodes, you can toggle it on and then.
Right.
keep
So
it
now
in
that's
Shadow
part of the tools. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually ties into some really interesting stuff. Sorry to keep interrupting, but
No.
I've actually been tasked to review the spec and see what the problems with it are and what it needs to explain. So there's a couple interesting points you brought up. One is the security boundaries, and as you emphasized, it's not the security boundary. You can look inside Shadow DOM if you try hard enough, if you use the right CSS selectors, or if you access the shadow root property. It's not meant to be an actual encapsulation barrier. It's meant to be a security barrier. It's meant to be a inconvenience and like an underscore on your JavaScript variable names, maybe with an IDE that hides underscore properties. So that actually brings up the question of whether these things are useful for explaining the platform, because you mentioned that they implement video tags in terms of Shadow DOM, but they actually add an extra layer of magic, which is
They do, yeah.
You can't actually get to the shadow root of a video tag, and you can't CSS select the inner pieces of a video tag. And there's a question of because one of the purposes of Shadow DOM is to be able to explain these big composite tags, a video tag or a select tag, right? That whole unstylable, horrible select tag that we all wish we could style. But do they actually do so? Because that would mean you'd have to expose the internals, and most browser vendors aren't willing to expose the internals. And even if they are willing to expose the internals, they're definitely not willing to expose the internals in a standardized way that all the different browsers agree on. So that's part of it. Another issue of how they may not explain existing tags is there's a lot of capabilities existing tags have that these don't. And one of the easiest examples is form submission. So there's no way for your custom Shadow DOM to say, oh, I'm going to be participating in form submission, and when you submit a form with me as a child, you need to add me to the list of elements that gets passed along. So these are kind of the things that I've just kind of run into looking at this spec and seeing how useful is this. And it gives you a lot of power, and it's really nice for a lot of use cases, but it's interesting to think of, is this really how we should think of video tags being implemented or complex input controls being implemented? It doesn't quite have that power yet. And so we're thinking about what can we do to get it to the point where it can. So thanks for letting me.
Well, anything else?
Oh, God. So, 7.
Sure. Well, thank you.
How's everybody?
Great.
I was going to introduce him because he has my name, but it's okay. Juan.
I'm sorry, I ruined your introduction.
That's okay.
I want to share a cool fact. This is actually the first time I'm the second Colombian to present.
That was not on purpose.
We're taking over your JavaScript. Let me see if I can get everything in focus. At least yet. That's an old presentation for Brooklyn JS, I'm sorry. I use the same style.
What else is on there?
Alright. So grunt, gulp, bash, what? Basically, I'm gonna very quickly. I think I chewed more than I don't know the same. Whatever.
Broccoli.
We talked the last meetup. There was a presentation about grunt. Some people mentioned gulp, and then there's been a debate in this this social media debate about like I'll use this tool, you should not use this tool. So I wanted to share a little of like my experience using these tools. I submitted the talk, and this tool didn't exist. So let's just add it. And besides that, there's really a lot of task builders and task runners, and so why not just throw them into the mix? But before I start, there was this presentation that actually came out. Let me see, how do I get back to my browser? Came out yesterday, I think. It's the Build Wars, and it compares gulp versus grunt. I would like to encourage you to look at it. Actually, it's pretty much, I should have just presented that and nothing else. But yeah, we do have more than one tool to do the same thing. I want to encourage you to stop calling everything a war. We need more than one thing to do our jobs. So we need to start treating our front end. I'm sorry if I'm assuming that everyone here is front engineer. That's what I specialize in. But we need to start thinking more about how we are craftsmen and women. These are the hammers that a silversmith uses. They all look very similar. They all have a specific purpose, and we need to pick the right tool for the job and start treating our tools as tools, and not like, oh, I use Angular and you use Ember and my T-shirt is better. My GitHub hoodie is better. So back to where we started. What's the point of task runners? We should become better at working on our domain as engineers. We all work for businesses, and there's always a business purpose. So one of the points of task runners is to automate, to reduce tasks that we do frequently, like building our JavaScript, building our CSS, linting. We therefore increase productivity, and we are able to spend more time working in what our business needs are. Even if you're working in open source, you still have some needs that you should focus on. There's, as we mentioned, a few of them. Bash, make, they're just tools. You have ant, rake, jake, cake, grunt, gulp, brunch, broccoli, and I'm sure there's many more that I'm missing. But how do I choose? I'm focusing this presentation a little bit more on front end and the usual tasks that I have to run, like JavaScript linting, compilation of CSS frameworks. So I set some baselines. There should be a normal learning curve. It should be stack agnostic. I don't need to learn a new language to run my tools. They're front end focused because that's what I'm talking about. It should be quick and easy to install. There should be some existing tasks at least, so I don't have to build a lot of stuff by myself. I really like when there's good community adoption, because it means that the tool will last and there's less bugs and it will be maintained. Hopefully, it will not be hard to create new tasks, and then depending on the size of my project, if I'm building a small module or like a huge architecture, I should choose whatever applies better. Sample project. This is usually something that many front-end projects need to do: link, concatenate, minify, and copy their JavaScript and their styles. Then you can add deployment or test running, but those are more subject to your own project. So I want to do a quick elimination. Has anyone ever worked with Ant? How do you like configuring that? Just for those who haven't, I have. This is the HTML5 boilerplate configuration, project configuration file. You're supposed to uncomment whatever you need. It's the first builder that I ever encountered a few years ago. I still don't understand it completely, so I'm going to eliminate it.
Okay, to be fair, like 2/3 of those comments are descriptions of what the ant task is trying to do.
Yeah, yes, of course. No,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. My intention is to show that it's not very straightforward. And this is obviously a large project. It's not a small module. In my experience, I eliminated it because it was hard to configure. No, I'm not getting there. Rake requires that I know Ruby, and it's mostly used for Rails projects. Again, it's not all the time, but it's where it comes from. Cake was designed for CoffeeScript compilation and other related tasks. Jake is actually probably the predecessor to Grunt. It's more like a wrapper, and it allows you to define tasks, but then you actually have to write each task, and they never came up with the idea of plugins or other tasks, and it just remained like that. It still exists and it's maintained. And then Brunch, I didn't like it because it said this in the this is very opinionated of my part, because they are very opinionated as well. They just want my application to fit the structure that they have defined, and unfortunately that doesn't really work for many projects unless you start from that baseline. So this is what I have left. Bash make, we have Grunt, we have Gulp, and Broccoli, your new project. So let's compare installation. Make comes pre-installed. So in Bash, well, if you have terminal, you have access to Bash. Grunt, Gulp, and Broccoli all have very, very, very similar installation. You have you install the command line tool as a global, and then you install the module as a local dependency. All these are based in JavaScript. They use Node, so you need to know JavaScript. Configuration is pretty similar. They all have a specific config file that you use to specify whatever task you're going to run. And now we're going to quickly compare one task, which is minification. Make and Bash are very different because it's more of a tool for you to automate your terminal. So you can run any command that you have available in your path. In this case, we would be running YUI compressor, which is defined, and actually have the file here. This would be like a make file where you're defining variables and tasks. These are the actual. Is that big enough? No?
Bigger for the camera.
Bigger for the camera.
I'm just teasing.
For the camera.
But that's pounds, not font size.
So that's an example there. I'm gonna keep this unminimized. Can you see? So I can.
Yes.
Then I added this because it's very interesting. This is Substack tweeted about Bash being his build tool. He uses npm to run tasks. So it's very similar to a makefile. He's very against other tools that are complex. But it's an interesting take, so I kept it there as a parallel. Then we're going to do the same thing in grunt file. Basically, we would install a plugin, which I'll show you in a moment, where it is done, and then you configure what you want that task to do. Every task has a specific configuration, and you can move forward. So now if you want to look at the grunt file, this is a typical grunt file. You load the tasks that you have installed as npm modules, you configure them, and then you can register them. You can group multiple tasks together. We have the gulp file, which looks very, very different. Gulp uses streams. Are you familiar with streams? Oh, a little. Who knows streams? Okay. So I'll give you a little URL to play with them later. But basically, it's a flow control mechanism. Basically, you're passing over stuff from one function to another in some. I'm not going to explain streams. This is not my domain. I'm sorry. Maybe Dominic can help me with that. I'm sure he knows those way better than I do.
Don't spend Manhattan.js.
Exactly. Next is the 26th. The broccoli file is not very similar to either grunt or gulp. Broccoli uses something that they call our trees. So instead of you determining like paths for files, you create trees. I only started looking at this like on Sunday, so it's a little bit confusing to me still. I'll have to do my homework and probably write something about it. Got to show you the gulp file. This is the standard gulp file as well. You require modules, and you just pipe things from one side to the other. This is like how you build Sass or you minify JavaScript. And I think we can get back to so how they compare. I think the only very immediate difference from these is that grunt focuses on configuration, and the other runners focus on code. So you are more programmatic. You define what you want to do with code. As far as the learning curve, make can get really, really, really complex. I don't understand probably 80% of how to do a lot of things. I can run Mocha with it, so I'm good. Grunt, you're basically configuring an object, a JavaScript object, so it's very easy to get started. Gulp it's also very easy. You're just passing things from one side to the other. In Broccoli, I think the thing that tricked me is this concept of trees that I really want to get more familiar with, but just from my experience, I think it looks a little bit more complex to learn. Configuration with both make and grunt can get very complex. If you have too many tasks, your grunt files can get crazy. I can probably at the end show you one if I have enough time. Gulp, there's no configuration, so maybe you could probably end up with very long files, but they would just be functions you could probably abstract even more. Broccoli, I have no idea. I haven't worked with it that much. They're all very easy to install. Make there's no community. It doesn't apply. Grunt, there's a huge following. I think Grunt is probably almost 2 years old, so it's mature enough. It's in version 4.1, I believe. Gulp is probably 4 months old. It's medium, but it's had like a very big following now, and a lot of people are learning Gulp by implementing existing grunt modules in Gulp, which is a really good idea if you're learning how to do or how to write JavaScript or something. Broccoli just launched. I think they have their main modules, and we'll see what happens with it. Then other things that I'd like to keep in mind is the difficulty of creating a task. So for make and bash, you don't really create. You probably create new either binary programs to run, or you can use modules that have access you have access through the command line. With Grunt, it's straightforward. It's just writing a node module in the end. Gulp may get a little complex when you're thinking about streams if you're not used to thinking that way. But it seems straightforward enough. Broccoli, I can't comment. I'm sorry. And then another thing to bear in mind is the size of the project. I've seen Grunt work very, very well in small modules where you can keep your things under control. Once you start adding other environments in other things, it gets complex. And I think it's because Grunt was not designed to be a build tool. It's more of a task runner, like, hey, do this for me, do this for me. While others are more focused on actually building things. I think, in conclusion, I can't really tell you which one to use, but I would encourage you to try them all. In production, don't, like at work, probably I would go with something that's more established. We use Grunt at Onsite and have for since it started, I think since it came out. And it's I actually can probably show you our file. It's gotten a little messy. Ah. It's not that bad. No, I've seen some horrible ones. This is well, basically we should have this. This should have been abstracted to another module. Just lazy. And our configuration is okay. It's not that bad. But the reason why we have to duplicate a lot of things is because we have multiple environments. So you end up replicating the same object all over again.
Question?
Yes.
Well, I don't have a question, but I've recently put together a build in Gulp on a project of reasonably significant size, and was hoping I could share some perspective. If I might.
Sure.
So I've done some hobby work with Grunt, and it's certainly polished. You know, it certainly has a beautiful website and lots of tools, but you can get into, I found, configuration hell where you're just sort of duplicating information and twisting yourself in knots. I found with Gulp, it's low polished. The website is raw. Some of the package community tasks are not really ready. The output isn't as sweet, but the actual work is beautiful. You know, we recently adopted auto prefixer on Dominic's advice, and so just one line into the pipeline, right? We run SAS, we pipe it to auto prefixer, and then we pipe it to minify, and we fork it, and we have a unified version which is compressed and a non-unified version which is not compressed. And so that's all of 4 lines of code. Very similar to what you have, right? If you want to auto prefixer, right, you just do line 21.5 and you're off to the races.
Right.
The other thing that's really nice is it's just JavaScript, right? So you run a web server, you don't need a task runner. You just say spin up a web server, right? Express or whatever you want. And then there was also, I think, a lot of flexibility in handling complexity. Some of our projects couldn't use libsass, others could. So, but we still wanted the auto prefix or the minification of everything, right? So you just like do some JavaScript. Is this a project that is legacy and needs a different version of Sass? Sure, do it. Type it through the rest. Where in Grunt,
Right.
I don't even know how it accomplished that. And
No,
so-
and I think it comes down to the fact that Grunt is more, it's designed
Neat
to
enough.
automate. And it's not a building tool. It's for you to run tasks. That it allowed people like me to end up build tools with it. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But running tests, for example, Gulp is probably not a good example to run tests if you're like going to automate.
We're using Karma and it just runs. Yeah. No, it was fine actually. Or if you're using coffee or not, sorry, a mocha. Sorry, they're similar products. No, we found that just fine. And we're using it in production.
Yeah, so in defense of, I mean, so I agree with a lot of what Grunt says, but just in defense of Grunt a little, I think a lot of the problems that you see in Grunt files are not necessarily inherent to Grunt. They're just kind of the conventional way of writing a Grunt file. There's a lot of configuration. Like, you know, you can still spin up a web server in your Grunt file if you want. You don't have to use the express Grunt task thing with all the configuration. It's just that conventionally, it seems like people who like Grunt like to do configuration, and so they end up with these big configuration blocks. And I think, you know, when you talk about duplicating things, you know, when you see a typical Grunt task, you see like a very declarative, you know, list of configuration. Whereas you could just create a JavaScript object at the top and like have that as your value and not repeat yourself at all.
Yeah.
So it's more it's certainly there is a qualitative difference, right? Like a pipeline of stuff is a very different paradigm and lends to different code than a configuration. But your configuration doesn't have to be horrible, and there are things you can do to make your Grunt files better, even if they're not what you would normally see in an example.
I agree. I concur. Well,
one thing. Sorry, quick note just to throw it on Broccoli since we had
yes.
There are some early stages of looking into it, but just I think one thing that's useful to note is that Broccoli is like super focused on the build problem and intends to leave the task running problem to Grunt or whatever you want to use. And I think that Broccoli is really born out of the frustration with the speed of that build.
Right. So one of the things that I missed to mention is that once you get with Grunt, probably everything runs. As I'm saying, if you want to lint, you have a task that lints your files. There's 160 JavaScript files, and one was modified, the entire thing will run. Again, there's Grunt modules that try to parallelize and optimize things, but it's not built for like that use case. I think Gulp is really good at managing like single updates, and I think Broccoli was built for that.
Well, in the watch case it is.
For that, right? And the watch case is usually the scenario where you want things to be really fast. Because if you're like building a release, you want to go over everything. Broccoli mentions like incremental builds. Is I believe what they mentioned. But the conclusion is like, learn your tools. Use something. Don't rewrite everything every time because you're spending more time doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing. And it's also like a very good way to get started with contributing to open source or learning JavaScript is by replicating, like try transferring one task from one component, from one runner to another. It will help you understand how both things work.
If you can beat Syndrome.
This is my. Do you have questions in addition to anything else?
You don't actually have that much time.
much time. Sorry.
No, no, it's okay.
No blaming on Dom.
It's all our.
No, 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 it's not me. So, it was.
Should I skip a few slides or?
No, no. It's okay. All right. I will stand up and look at you for a second.
I doubt that.
I will try my best to stand up here.
Yeah, this is his menacing spot.
Yeah, basically.
I can try to get creepy or something. So this is Sean Mize. He's going to be talking about very exciting things like modules and how to move to them. Let's see the slide in a second. Maybe.
Looking good so far.
This is my photo now. Looking real good.
I'm getting used to it because
Aw.
you ruined it.
You ruined
Your photo bomb was good. You ruined.
Totally intentional.
You ruined the photo.
Hi everyone. So that's me on Twitter and GitHub and wherever I can nab that particular handle. Feel free to reach out to me after. I like meeting other developers. If you like puns and cats, front of the line, so way to go. Moving to modules, why not just give you an introduction to this? I think it's important to talk about how you'd apply this in a legacy circumstance, because chances are, if you're writing a new project, you're using modules anyway. You're going to be you're writing a node, or you might be moving over to a nice front-end opinionated framework that has its own setup, or you're going to be using modules as they use them anyway. Also, just so you know, my background, I'm 8 years in at Glamour.com, working on their digital side. This is, what, a year and a month in as a full-time engineer for them, with those guys over there. So say hi to them later. Modules, how do they work? I abstracted a definition where it's just pretty simple. A unit of code with an encapsulated definition, so it's got its own scope, it's not going to add to the global, that explicitly declares its dependencies, no more counting on jQuery to have been loaded, or that you've got that precise load ordering of all those beautiful scripts you've written or pulled in from other people or vendors. And then whose instances can be mapped to different identifiers that expose its interface. So what the hell does that mean? It's just really easy to assign the result of that module instance to your variables within other modules or within your application, so you can namespace everything and then access it just like you would with dot notation for anything else, if it happens to be an object. Benefits, it's a cleaner global namespace, eases dependency management, so you, like I said, you don't have to worry about the order in which your scripts are loading if you do it well. Reusability. A key point for this is not just reusability of your own code, but being able to pull in from everybody else. I'm sorry if this is old hat for some of you, but we'll skip through, particularly with the time constraint. And then testability. Because it is a discrete unit of code, you've got that built right in, just perfect for unit testing. Something I am guilty of not doing enough of. So we actually have a day later this week where we're going to be doing that for a Glamour web client. Should I wait for Harmony, you might be asking yourselves. Harmony has modules. They're going to write the spec, right? No. Goals of Harmony. I'm not going to read all these, but I wanted to highlight a couple. Smooth refactoring from global code to modular code and interoperability with existing stuff. So if you write it now, it's probably going to be fairly simple to either shim it, or automate, or wrap, or whatever you want once we get to Harmony, and you'll be good to go. If you dare now, you can try some transpiling. I wouldn't in a production environment, but go for it. There's no technical excuse not to migrate. So where do you start? Pick your poison. For this particular setup, I'm going to refer to these very sort of simplified terms of a format and a loader. So the format's your module definition API, or a syntax for the way that you style that, or you write that. And then the loader would be some system, either require.js or curl or the node module system that will be able to read those models in for you. Quick look at the syntax. Node.js is sort of a variant of common.js format, so there's a few distinctions because that node's a fairly popular one. I'll go over that. You've got your require right up top, and you have your module definition with the logic, and then you attach it or assign it to the exports module.exports piece there. So how many of you have used Node and are familiar with this syntax? Great. I'm going to skip over this next slide fairly quickly. Oh. There's the also where we require it later in our application. So make everything awesome. See the Lego movie. This is a particular nodism. If it is all confusing to you, just use module.exports. But basically, you can imagine it this way. Exports is an alias in this case. If you reassign it, it's not necessarily going to do the things you expect. So a lot of folks just use this one inline or just module.exports at this point. AMD. This one is primarily, I'd say, more thought of for the browser, although you can do it on the server side and shim it in or use some fancy build tools with Gulp or Grunt and incorporate them. The cool thing here with AMD is it is primarily thought of for asynchronous code loading. It doesn't always work out that way in implementation, but it's at least got its roots there in sort of how you would think about your code. So the great thing is you define your array of dependencies. Those are going to map to the arguments of your factory or whatever you'd like to call it there. And then you return rather than assign to your exports. You can find, there's also a sugared syntax in many of the loaders for this that makes it a little bit simpler. We'll get to that later. And use it. Any questions so far? It's all pretty awesome. So which do you want to use in your applications? How many of you actually deal with legacy code that is, old front-end code that you have lots of libraries? Okay, so it's not a majority of the room, but it's lovely, isn't it? So if you're moving a node on the server side, you pretty much want to have the path of least resistance, use the node variant of CommonJS. You can, if you choose to, try AMD or a more specific CommonJS, but that's going to be a little extra work. So if you just want to do it quickly, use what node's got built in. You're primarily in the browser. AMD plus require.js, curl.js are similar. If I've left out your favorite one, don't attack. But there's really great build tools and loaders out there to take a look at. You need to share logic across both. So say you've got a lot of utility methods on the node side that it's really not specific to node, and you want to be able to share that instead of rewriting it each time or copying or some other terrible solution. You're going to need help. This will be one of those cases where you'd use Browserify, and I do pronounce it that way. It's probably Browserify. Thanks. Yeah. I like this sound.
I like going browser
Browsers are it, right? So you'll need help. There's other ways to shim these things in. There's also some great patterns with UMD. We'll talk about that in a bit. So what about my favorite thing or my custom module loader? No. Shape Fiori X. Move to what everybody else is doing. So choose an approach. It doesn't have to be the approach. I don't have that for you. But pick what you're going to do and then apply it consistently and clearly within your application. And if you can't do that, make a comment. That's the perfect time for it. And if it still doesn't really work for you, write a library and make it a module and share it with the rest of us. Pick your battles. This is the one nod to a project management interest that I have, so it's one slide. What are your goals? What would be most useful for your near-term needs in your project? This is the most generic business question ever, but it still applies. Pick one thing in your code that bugs you every day that you deal with, or that it breaks, or you're always getting this call, and try to fix that with this. How quickly, completely can or do you need to convert? So is it the sort of thing where you've got a small application in terms of the front end where you could convert that in a day or a sprint or whatever your division of work is? Or would you have to make it incremental? There's a couple of things that you can do right away that will give you benefits. And are you in it primarily for front end benefits or code reuse across the stack? As I mentioned, it's a little bit more work to do the latter. And are there any consumers of your libraries? So at Conde, which is Glamour's parent company, and you're in their building, we have tons and tons of centralized repos. They all want globals. So you have to use some sort of UMD pattern if you're going to make modules out of that to share with everybody else that hasn't switched over. Any questions so far? All good? Great. Migrate. So map your dependencies. It doesn't really matter how you choose to do this. Paper's good, whiteboard. You can even just sort of map it out in code comments in your config file. You don't have to do this stuff. You could skip it. You could just skip right into implementation. But I find it's really useful, particularly if you have an older, larger application that you're coming into, to really understand what those implicit dependencies are. So you get a lot of cases where you'll load up a file and it'll add globals that you don't even know about until later, or something else will depend on an object that's returned that has this other property that's only added when another file is loaded. So look out for those, try to map them as best you can, and then load all of your files via a loader. You don't have to convert your files over to modules just yet. You can use require.js's shim. There's a similar but not recommended even by the people who wrote it curl plugin called JS. I think there's an exclamation, so it's JS. You can use that and other methods of doing it to get your legacy code loaded up via that loader mechanism, even if your format or your syntax isn't modular just yet. I found that particularly useful to just get everything in there first, and then you can start tackling dependencies. So the require.js shim, how many of you have used this? Okay, a fair number of you. It's really basic. The base URL is where you're going to grab all your stuff. Paths, if you don't have something in the base URL, or if it's in a folder and you want a shortcut for the namespace, you can do that path piece. And the shim is really kind of magical. You have your identifier, foo, you put its dependencies in that list, an array. Exports is what it's going to be looking for on the global namespace, or it'll add, so assume that your legacy code has variable foo on the window. It will grab that for the value, and then if you've got this init function, you can do some setup with it, with its dependencies, again, mapping the array to the arguments list. If it returns a value, that will be used instead of the exports. That's the only caveat I've found about it. Other than that, it's pretty gravy. Walk your dependencies, wrapping or converting as you go. So now that you've got everything loaded, ideally, using one of these loaders, it's time to start converting things over. This is a step, we did this with Glamour last year, where we're using a new web app based on Node and Express. And as we went through, we've been refactoring a lot. So that's been fun. But you'll see things that don't quite jive maybe with modern practice, particularly if you've got older files in there. Or even things that, if you're working on the front end piece, may not work so nicely with AMD. So. Possible sticking points. And yeah, I called that interlude. Code sequencing. This is an old pattern that we ran into, and it's very old. I realize that some of this stuff might be years and years out of date. But you've got where you load up your files, and then you have these init methods. And then inside var, it's going to depend on something that foo has created during initialization. So a transitional way to handle this is to use this wrapper where you're still saying loading these things up as dependencies for your application, and then you're calling the init manually. And then I think the final form that you want to get to eventually here is that your initialization step happens in your module definition. So you don't have to worry about it anymore. You're not going to be worried. This middle step is like worrying about which order your script elements are in your markup. You still have to be concerned about what the calls are. This is where we want to go. Globals. You're using AMD, but the others who happen to consume your libraries aren't. This is a wrapper. I know that these can be contentious for some folks who think, wow, that's a lot of typing or a lot of extra cruft, or I'll just automate it. You can automate it quite nicely with several libraries, but UMD is something that I take a look at quite a bit, particularly as we have two web clients running simultaneously for Glamour. So a lot of our certain content types like slideshows are being hosted on the old web app, and the blog posts are hosted on the new one. We write all of our code in the new web app in modular form, and then anything that needs to be pulled back to the old app, we use a wrapper similar to this and load it from the new application with Nginx in the front. Ask me later if you want to know about some of that. That's fine. So basically, you've got a brilliant little pattern here where you're putting in root and factory. Root's your context, this, or window, depending on where you are. And then factory is going to be your module definition. If you have define available and you're in an AMD environment, you're just going to define it as a regular module. If you're not, it'll just attach it as a global variable. There's also variants of this pattern that are really handy, where even if you are in an AMD environment, if you're not sure about third-party, say, ad code or video loaders that might depend on certain globals, it allows you to have modular and global exports. Profit. That's it. It's really, really simple. And the last part I wanted to get into, and John, how am I doing on time? Am I zipping through?
You're zipping through.
Excellent. Cleanup. So this is the fun stuff, I think, when you can deal with package management. We've got Bower, we have NPM. You can consume your own packages if just with GitHub repo addresses or tars. So this is great where once you're using modules, even on the front end, you can consume everybody else's great work. Optimize. So the Require.js has RJS. There's, I think it's CRAN for curl.js. I'm not really sure. I forgot. Sounds good. CRAN. And then there's Browserify, which will let you use CommonJS or Node style syntax on the browser side as well. And it does a lot. It will bundle that up quite nicely into one file.
It'll actually generate UMD files for you as well. So you can do a standalone, and the output is a UMD module.
Fantastic. So that's something we need to do right away on Glamour, right?
Yes. Actually, I work with it. I want to talk to you tomorrow if you have time.
Good.
Excellent.
Networking with people you already work with. So, optimizing. There's also, I'm going to give a plug for John because I can. How do you like to pronounce it? Promethify?
Oh, Promethify.
Promethify? Yeah. So that, if you're interested at all in AMD and using a CommonJS style syntax, Promethify will actually not only asynchronously execute and handle your dependency mapping, it will actually load only the JS that you need on the front end. So if there's any performance issues that you thought, wow, I really want that, check that out. And then it's a great time to incorporate grunt or gulp or broccoli or brig or make or any with linting and validation into your workflow. So if you've primarily worked on small projects and sort of one-off stuff and you're not using validation, linting, automated testing, some of these task runners or build tools, now's a great time to dig into that because they're really awesome. We redid our dev tooling from bash scripts to grunt primarily for Glamour, and I think our instances used to spin up in what, like 40, 50 seconds. We'd also have to use make and Maven. And now they're down to maybe 20, less, 10 on a good day when the network's nice. And add test, as I said, already guilty, doing it Friday. Don't wait for Harmony, write better code now. Any questions?
So actually, I was going to mention that Browserify also has a shim system, so you can shim. Actually written by one of my folks, Torsten Lawrence.
Oh yeah.
Wrote the shim system, so you can actually shim legacy code into Browserify.
Very cool. So you can essentially, I think he's mentioning the shim where you can use a node style or
you can shim
JS
jQuery. So older versions of jQuery, which aren't common build, doesn't really work very well in NPM still. But you can take jQuery and you can make it work like it was a common JS module. You require jQuery.
Yeah, I was taking a look at that today. I think you can actually load up other anything that isn't in modular format. So you can require it just like any other.
Like CNDAR.
Exactly. Like CNDAR. Let's not speak of that again.
So I would say in the linting, you
Yeah.
want to make sure you've got strict turned on.
Sure.
It's really easy not to it, and
Right.
it's also really easy to fool yourself in that thinking your modules are modular, but they actually have invisible handles to globals.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So the latest version of JSON forces strict mode on. You have to actually explicitly tell it not to do strict warnings, which
Right.
is really nice about that.
Right, but that's the latest version. And
Yes. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. And also just be wary of those directives at the top of the files where somebody's like, I don't want strict. Strict is for jerks. You're wrong.
Hey, great talk, thank you.
Thank you.
One quick point of difference on ES 6 modules today with the transpiler.
Yeah.
Actually works great today.
Fantastic.
So you said don't use it in production. Obviously, it's a build time thing anyway, transpiling.
Sure.
So you can transpile to AMD or UMD or whatever, JS, whatever you want.
Sure.
But the syntax is beautiful and you're future-proofed.
And what are you using to? And it looks like we might have a point of contention to your point of contention. But what are you using for that?
ES6 module transpiler.
Sure.
So I've used ES6ify, which is the browserify transformable code. And just because I like saying ify things, that's not really Thurston's not here. And it is, although I also have not used it in production, but it is a lot of fun. Because it is so much better. There are some things that are so much easier.
If you've ever written D3 code and been like, I don't want to type the word function again ever,
It is.
then you can finally use arrow functions.
There are a lot of very nice new features that you can have for fairly low cost, depending on
Okay.
what kind of tooling you have to bring in.
Yes.
Don't use let for everything.
Use less food. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Any other?
I understand though, is it easy if we have, I would be happy. It's a browser.
Hey.
That's
How's it going?
What about just doing?
Went a little longer, but that's okay.
Module test?
Yeah.
So, I have some announcements to make that I should remember, but I have my phone right here in case I need to look at it. So one is, as usual, because you are here, you get early access to the next meetup, so no one here should be complaining to me that they cannot get on the RSVP list. The next meetup is on March 12th. So you look at your calendar right now, which you will do right now before you leave this room, and you are free. You should go to the meetup right now, sign up, because you have access before I announce it to anyone else. Tomorrow morning I will announce it and the RSVP will go up. There's nothing I can do. The next thing is, so next week we are having our hacker hours. Very sadly on the same day as the Ember meetup. As Luke, the amazing organizer, is here today, I feel very bad about announcing this in front of him. But in case you are not going to the Ember meetup, it is going to be at the Ladders. It's February 27th. Basically, we just get around tables, have pizza and soda, and this place has beer, yes, and beer, and we code on things, and usually end up talking about broccoli and cauliflower for a long time.
I missed what the actual event was. I got that it was a conflict with something else, but what was the actual
Hacker
event?
hours. So this is what we do. We sit around, talk,
Hacking hours.
have pizza, beer, and soda. And if you are free, please feel free to come by. You should RSVP for that. That's already open, and I believe already announced. Okay, so I would like to thank Condé Nast. They're hiring. Let me know if there's anyone who is looking. Condé Nast has been very nice to us. Gave us pizza, gave us space, all of these things. I'd love to talk to you more about that if you have the urge. The next thing is, okay, so you're all coming to the bar, right? You don't have to drink anything at the bar, but you're going to come there. We're going to talk about the cauliflower, because I haven't released it yet. It's like so much better than broccoli. It's so much better.
Take that back.
You can mash this stuff. It's so much better. Okay.
How do you make?
Oh, that was good. That was subtle. It took me a second. Okay, so you should come to the bar. It's right across the street. It was selected solely because you did not have to walk at all. Last thing, and sort of a surprise because I haven't actually talked to the speakers about this, but it's something that I sort of want to talk to you because there might be some people out here that might be able to help us. So, we as the NYCHTML5 Meetup would like to start doing a podcast with the speakers, who I haven't yet asked to do this, every month or so that we can actually have like something recorded, something to talk about, ask a little bit more in-depth questions, maybe talk a little bit more about what gets them interested in these kinds of things. So we would like to do a monthly podcast-like thing.
Yeah.
Good. Glad you like that. Someone likes that. Okay. So I know nothing about podcasting. We know sort of nothing about podcasting. So if any of you have any like advice, thoughts, or microphones, let me know. What's probably going to happen now is after I ask these people very nicely, because they're never going to say no. Now
It's like a proposal on a jump.
it is, except oh good, okay. But now you can never say no, because I've already done it. You have to be okay with it. Sometime this weekend, we're all going to get on a call. Chances are, the first time it might be a hangout, maybe it will be live, and we'll tweet it or something in case you want to follow along and talk with us or type with us. And hopefully something like that will be available along with the next video that will be put out sometime in the next weeks. So let me know if you have any podcast experience, mics. We have at least one. I think you need fancy mics for this thing. I'm just something I've Googled for. Anyway, thank you so much. I will see you on March 12th because you're going to RSVP. I will see you later at the bar tonight. Have a good day. Thank you for coming.
No longer a reasonable world these days. Going one side, shouting on the
No, I just got one of my friends.
Because like the camera was there and you were waiting to